You guys look like... What do they look like, Jimmy?
Dorks. They look like a couple of dorks.
Get those birds! Birds!
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
What? Are you kidding? We got some family here. Can you dig it? Can you dig it? Can you dig it?
You are listening to the In the Mouth of Dorkness podcast. Here are Brad, Lisa, Brian, and Darren.
Welcome to another edition of the ItModcast podcast. Joining us is Brian Young, the Turtle Dork.
Happy Friday, everybody.
Oh, and also joining us is Lisa Gullickson, Wife Dork.
Hello.
And Brad Gullickson, Mouth Dork.
They'll never see me coming.
And I'm your host, Darren Smith, the Disco Dork. And welcome to the ItModcast podcast. This is not a Fistful Friday, per se. This is our MCU Phase 2 cast.
Yeah.
You commit to the quotes on every episode, even when it's not necessary.
I love quotes. I was about to do the whole Trevor Slattery speech from Iron Man 3, but that would require you guys to get on board, too.
A little prep time. I could do that. I'd be game. Anyway, what we're doing is we're going back through the MCU, leading up to Avengers Infinity War, which is coming out very soon. And that journey has taken us to and through Phase 2 of the MCU. And so we're here to give our thoughts on that. If you have not listened to the episode where we talk about Phase 1, please do yourself a favor and check that out. In the meantime, let's crack this nut. So now the first film in Phase 2 is Iron Man 3, right? So that's where we're at now.
Yeah.
Shane Black's entry into the MCU. We're huge fans of Shane Black here at the podcast. It's not a secret. And let's start there. Let's talk about his unique and interesting voice as it pertains to this cinematic universe and this character of Tony Stark.
I love Iron Man 3.
Mm-hmm.
I love Iron Man 3. To me, this is the first film really in the entire franchise that a director's voice truly steers the film.
Yeah.
You could certainly sense Joss Whedon in the Avengers, but Shane Black is the engine behind the wheel. How's this metaphor working?
How do cars work?
Of Iron Man 3.
That makes sense, because you think about Phase 1, everything is kind of leading up to Avengers, and everything, I don't want to say has a singular voice, because, Kenneth Branagh's Thor definitely feels like that Shakespearean.
Dutch angles.
Yeah, but everything feels like it's leading. But yeah, you're right. I think Shane Black, knowing his pedigree from before, he feels like he puts his stamp onto Iron Man.
And with Iron Man 3, there are just several Shane Black sequences strung together, right? Yeah. There's where he goes down to Tennessee and he has the precocious child sequence, and we've seen that in other Shane Black movies. Yeah. There's the buddy cop moments when Don Cheadle and Tony Stark finally partner up at Trevor Slattery's mansion, and Riggs and Murtaugh it pretty much. Yeah.
And then the setting.
And then it's Christmas time, jingle bells, man. You got to have Christmas, Christmas in Malibu, So I really feel like from here you get we'll talk about Thor. Let's skip over Thor. From here you'll get the Russo brothers injecting their conspiratorial cinematic referential Winter Soldier. And then you get James Gunn's cosmic weirdo Guardians of the Galaxy. Joss Whedon puts a lot more Joss Whedon into Age of Ultron. And, Peyton Reed, spinning off of Edgar Wright. They feel much more auteur-driven than the previous phase. And as we're going into Phase 3, it only becomes more so. You look at Thor Ragnarok and Black Panther, and those are very much the result of those directors' voices.
Absolutely.
Lisa, did you... Hold on, first, this is what I want to say. Iron Man 3 was the first movie I ever saw in an Alamo Drafthouse.
That's right, yeah.
That was
I think that was when it opened.
The Alamo One Loudon. It was
One
not my
Loudon.
first Alamo Drafthouse experience, but it was my first film at the One Loudon.
Yeah.
It was my first
Same.
Alamo Drafthouse experience.
Same. I
So
remember
fun.
that. Yeah. Huh. All right. Were you a fan of Iron Man 3, Brian, when it first came out, when you first saw it?
I mean, because and it's funny because I'm rewatching it and living with the film for the last 4 or 5 years since it came out. I've actually grown to kind of like the film, like how you love it. I'm getting there. But when I initially saw it, I think because, and again, I've heard some people talk about it online. I'm not going to be one of these people that's like, oh man, the Mandarin twist. Like, I didn't know who these characters were. So
Nobody cares about the Mandarin.
I did, and I enjoyed that twist.
Yeah, but just narratively as a film, initially seeing the film, I was kind of put off by that twist because I was just expecting, not outside of the fact of the Mandarin and who the Mandarin is, I thought Ben Kingsley could have been like this really, really interesting and very like scary villain that Tony Stark would have had to come across. And then when we see that switch, I was like, it just took me back a little bit. But living with the film and rewatching it and seeing what Shane Black was actually going for, I respect that decision of what he was trying to do, and seeing who the real villain of the piece is and what this film more so is about. I actually like that twist a little bit more.
I think the Mandarin twist is hilarious, especially upon rewatches. Especially because we've seen the Mandarin in the trailer, so menacing, scary voice. You know, what year did this come out?
13.
Yeah, 2013. So, you know, we're all like immersed in this terrorism, fear, and all of that stuff. So I find the twist super fun. But when I think about Tony Stark's, like, what does this movie add to Tony Stark's overall character? I never think about Extremis, really. It's kind of hilarious how little the whole Extremis experience plays into Pepper Potts' character, because she goes through this film, she goes through something intensely traumatic. So for me, this movie really is about Iron Man. We get to see his journey with the PTSD following New York. That's really what this movie is about. And at first I was really put off by the way, and I love this movie. I find it super entertaining. I enjoy rewatching it. One thing that I found annoying on my first watch was the way that panic attacks were depicted in this film. Because I'm like, that's not what they're like. And it's like, you know, ask every third person. You could probably find out like what an anxiety attack looks like or feels like. And I know that they're different for everybody, but to see them depicted on screen, and I'm just like, that's not what it's like. It's like, oh, I've got to put my hands in snow. Like, that doesn't make any sense. But I do think that like talking about, this is another episode, but talking about like how in films they don't think they do these tremendous acts of violence and do all of this property damage, and nobody really talks about like the all of the damage that's happening outside. Like, to me, like, we watch these superhero movies, they're going through these traumatic experiences again and again and again. What happens inside? What kind of damage is happening inside? And I like that this film addresses that.
And when you look at the entire MCU as a whole, you're watching mostly Tony Stark's internal evolution. And that's like the storyline of this series that I find the most compelling.
And in this film, his evolution hits a compelling beat.
Yes.
And to which he would spring forward and grow from. The first time I saw the film, for the reasons that I like it now, were the reasons why I disliked it my initial viewing, because of Shane Black's voice, because it's distinctive, and because it separates itself from the voice of the movies that would be on either side of this film. Initially, because I've been used to a whole entire phase of Marvel movies up to this point, like I wasn't used to Shane Black's take on this comic book movie, because Shane Black, I think he reins it in a little bit as far as scope when dealing with Tony and Iron Man 3. We just come off of, you know, some end of the world stakes, you know, with the Avengers, and we were in Asgard with Thor, and now we're bringing it back in, and it's a really personal story.
And so much of the movie is about stripping him of his suit.
And so initially, you know, like, well, that's an interesting choice, especially at the beginning of a phase. You're going to take you know, you're gonna take Tony's suits away from him. Like, okay, so where do we go from here? But to me, what Lisa was saying, you know, upon rewatch, I now know what the movie is. I know what the aim is. I know where it fits in the grand scheme of things within the MCU and within Tony's overarching storyline. Now, when I go back and watch it, for me, what sticks out is what Lisa is saying, the examination of, dude, you just went into outer space. You just fell from outer space. And when you were up there, you didn't just stare at a star or the moon. You saw aliens. And the world almost ended. And you had some part in that, whether it be saving it or whatever. Yeah. That has to affect you. This isn't normal. This isn't what you always do. It gets to that point. It's what the interesting thing about, to bring up another comic book movie in a different studio, but BVS is looking at Batman and how you can't go years of fighting crime and not end up fucked up. Seeing all the crazy shit you've seen, like dealing with the Joker for years, like, there's no way that you can be a cop and have years on the force and not be affected in some way by the stuff that you see and come across. And so I like that Iron Man 3 addresses that.
And this is the fear that, of course, we know leads directly to Ultron. Mm-hmm. How am I going to process my anxiety? I'm going to prevent this from happening. I'm going to protect myself by protecting the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so that's, I don't know. I would argue, if you listeners, if you feel in the same way, if you've seen Iron Man like maybe once or whatever, and it, you know, it didn't really hit with you, I would challenge you to go back and rewatch it, especially if you have been following along the MCU and you've seen Tony grow and how stories and other characters grow and stem from his evolution as a character. I would challenge you to go back and rewatch Iron Man to see how it feels now.
And it genuinely helped Lisa's and myself's our marriage because it gave us the phrase "kiss it on the facial slit."
That's a little glimpse that maybe people didn't need to know.
Lisa, I know you're cooking, but can you kiss it on the facial slit?
All right. The next film in Phase 2 is Thor.
The Dark
World. I think you should set the floor with this one,
because
Darren.
if I don't, you're going to skip over this motherfucker.
I like this film too.
I think, just give me a high five for comfort.
I like every Marvel movie.
Yeah.
But this is the worst one.
I don't think it's a
bottom
secret.
Of the list.
Yeah, I don't think it's a secret that a lot of people feel that this is the lesser Marvel film, directed by Alan Taylor of Game of Thrones fan. He's probably done
Terminator Salvation. No, Terminator Genesis.
Right. For me, of Game of Thrones fan. Yeah. What you want to do with Thor: The Dark World? That's what I'm going to do with Terminator Genesis. I'm going to act like that doesn't exist. I enjoyed this film. We talked about in the review of Phase 1. We talked about Thor, and Brian, you just mentioned the director Kenneth Branagh and his take on the material. Brad, you mentioned the Dutch angles, which there are an abundance of. But what I didn't like about that film, those issues that I had with that film, I didn't find in Thor: Dark World. I found the humor more palatable, and that whole fish out of water thing that just didn't work for me initially with Thor. Because I didn't see that element in Thor: Dark World. I enjoyed it a lot more. I enjoyed a lot of the stuff with Loki. Brian, you talked about how in your rewatch of Thor, how you gravitated towards the tragedy of that character. And for me, I like how when we see him in this film, it is an extension of, you know, the stuff that happened in the first film, and then how, as far as Tom Hiddleston playing that character, how he's able to add some layers, and there's a bunch of great scenes with him on Asgard when he's in the prison cell, when
that's the best stuff.
The Dark Elves come and take over, and you know, because when people have their criticisms of Thor: The Dark World, I haven't read into them too much because I don't want it to affect. And I don't want to, you know, put myself in a negative headspace.
I'll put it to you in just like a few sentences.
So is it because it feels like it's just it doesn't have a plot, or
I think this is the beginning of the cliche MCU criticism of the villain problem.
Yeah. Okay.
And Malekith.
Yeah, I mean, he's probably not one of the best villains that we've had in the MCU, but I still think there's a lot of great stuff to gravitate towards in this film. I mean, again, it's just continuing to explore the relationship between Loki and Thor. Like, I'm thinking about that one scene when they're on that floating ship. And they're having, this is after Frida is her name, right? Freya, when she's died, and they're having this talk, and Thor is like, she wouldn't want us to argue, and then Loki's like, well, she wouldn't be shocked, and it's just like those little moments between these characters that really just kind of flesh out who they were growing up and a little bit more of their backstory. And I mean, Tom Hiddleston and Chris Hemsworth are just magnificent in this. I mean, Natalie Portman, I mean, we've talked about her before. The Fish Out of Water you talked about in the first film, you can almost kind of say they kind of shifted and reversed it by bringing her to Asgard.
But not really.
Not really. And I don't really mind having her on Asgard, because I think it also does bring a lot of dramatic tension between whether it's Sif or Odin.
But they don't really touch on that, though. They could have. There's some knowing glances, and that's about it.
Yeah, but it doesn't bother me with what they give us of that. But I find it interesting. And then again, just the look of the film. I think Alan Taylor, the cinematography of it.
The opposite of you guys. But
I think the cinematography, especially in like some of those opening battles when you see Thor and now he's protecting all the different realms, and that opening battle, he really does bring in kind of like that cinematography that we see from like Game of Thrones, where it just has a little bit more it's just a little bit more dynamic. And I don't know, I dig it. There's a lot of things I like about this film, but yeah, the villain is kind of inconsequential, but I
enjoyed the science aspect of this film. I enjoyed the visualization of the colliding of these worlds. And how like this truck is floating and you drop the keys and they show up somewhere else. And I like the fact that Jane Foster, like, she is a scientist. She's doing science, and she has had this, she's had a Hemsworth in her hands, and he's
what does that feel like?
Talk about how do you just move on with your life after that? You don't.
There is a shot of her at the very, very end of the film after he's gone the second time, where she's eating cereal. And that's what you feel.
Sad.
You feel her going like, I had a Hemsworth.
It's so intensely
It's in
sad.
my grasp.
But like the fact that she continues, it's just like she's doing real science, and she's not like, sitting around waiting for her prince to come back. She's like doing shit. And then also, I think that there are some really funny moments in this movie.
The humor, for me, I liked it better than the first Thor, but yeah, you're right.
I like, I've already talked about on other casts how I like the Kat Dennings character. I think she is so funny, and I feel like if I was in the MCU, like, I would be that character. Like, I don't know why I'm doing science, but here I am doing the best that I can.
And I like her in this film.
I think she's so funny. And like, when she gets like an intern of her own.
Oh my God, yeah.
So funny.
Dr. Eric Selvig, he also is dealing with
absolutely
what the
mental
experience
health
he went
trauma
through of Avengers, being under Loki's spell, which I found interesting. I like
just
that.
straight up broke his brain.
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting.
One of the best Stan Lee cameos of the franchise, where he's in the asylum with Selvig, and Selvig's like explaining the convergence using the shoes, and Stanley's like, "Can I have my shoe back?"
But this is another one where I don't really think about the plot or the villain. I just kind of think about the characters.
Yeah, I mean, it's just some great sight gags. Like the one is when he takes Mjolnir and puts him on the little the coat rack, and he's like looking to make sure it's going to hold up. He's like, okay.
Well, I mean, to your point, also with the action at the end, I really love what they do with the convergence and Mjolnir as Thor and Malekith are falling through portal after portal,
that's
and
cool.
Mjolnir has to go up into space, but then they're back on Earth, so he has to come back down and then back up into space and back down, and so it's all building to when Mjolnir finally lands in Thor's hand, so he can hammer that spike into Malekith's kaiju chest.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, man. Like with the subway, when he has to get on the subway.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's good. I like all that. I think, where I do think the action choreography is a step up from the first Thor film. I do not like the cinematography. I find it very muddy and ugly, especially when they're on Svetlheim. And
I don't know which
That
one
Baron,
it
is it
the Baron one with the muddy skies.
Oh.
It's filmed in Iceland, and if you look at like the behind the scenes shots of that, you're like, oh my god, look how great this is. Oh, they color corrected it to death, and I do not.
Is
like
that the one with Loki fakes his death?
Yeah.
Okay.
And this film has to carry the heavy burden of starting to explain the Infinity Gems with the ether, and it works for the most
is this
part.
the first one? Where
It's
we
the
really...
first. It's the first one where they talk
Okay.
about the relics.
But you don't know that it's a gem until that tag at the end.
No. They say it. Odin talks about the 9 ingots and how the ether is one that's in liquid form. In that scene, he talks about how that is an infinity gem.
Yeah.
But it's not integral to the plot as far as
correct.
It's
Yeah.
like in the way that Guardians is like that's the Power Stone.
Right.
Okay.
But I mean, the ether is integral to the plot.
Yeah.
And that's a stone, and you know from Odin's speech that it's one of the relics.
Okay.
And so I think for the most part, it does a decent job of starting that conversation, which will be picked up in Guardians of the Galaxy and touched on a little bit in Age of Ultron.
Yeah.
I think above all else is that Chris Hemsworth feels like, all right, I've gotten into my groove as far as Thor now. I'm really, because one of the appeals about him in the first movie and even in the Avengers is, and of course now after Ragnarok, we're like, who you recast Thor? But I feel like in Thor: The Dark World, in that opening sequence that you were talking about, I mean that cockiness for me, it feels like, all right, Chris Hemsworth has gotten into a groove as far as playing this character, and I feel that throughout, which makes it all the more impressive when Taika Waititi comes later on and says, all right, we're gonna kick it up a few notches with you.
And I think everything is leading to Ragnarok with what we see here, with what we see in especially Age of Ultron. Because I remember when Age of Ultron came out, one of my biggest takeaways was Thor and his comedic timing. I thought Chris Hemsworth was just amazing. So I think all this stuff is leading to what Taika was doing in Ragnarok.
So it wouldn't feel like such an abrupt shift.
Yeah, because you can see the comedic timing that Hemsworth has with the character of Thor. You definitely see it when we talk about Age of Ultron. It's all over that film.
Yeah. All right. What do we have after Dark World?
Winter Soldier.
Yes, Brad. I'll let you take it away.
I mean, this is my favorite Marvel movie.
Yes,
period.
sir.
And rewatching it during this phase just confirms how much I love this movie. In fact, I added it to my top 100 favorite films of all time after watching it this sequence.
Nice.
I mean, Captain America, I love him. But this film really dives into the pain of his concept of the man out of time. The film opens up with Steve Rogers jogging around the National Mall, making laps one after the other with poor Sam Wilson tagging behind. On your left.
Yeah.
And that scene, it might be my favorite scene in the entire franchise as well. Like the idea of, Cap recognizes, a fellow veteran, and, he's going to, they had fun. He had fun teasing this guy by, dust in circles around him. But then as he's leaving, Sam Wilson sees it as an opportunity to connect with a living legend. He's not going to let that pass. And he says, it's your bed at home, right? And Sam knows that Cap's just woken from the ice. He's been living a life on the Eastern Front, and coming home to a soft, cushy bed feels uncomfortable, is weird. It isolates you, because you've just been living this life of the soldier. And they strike up a conversation, and Sam becomes an ear for Steve's pain of the present. He's lost everything. Peggy Carter's practically on her deathbed in this movie, and all his friends are gone, and he tortures himself by going to the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum and seeing, the glory of his past. and seeing his, images of Bucky, his best friend who was there for him before the war, and who he thought had died, and now he wants to pick up the life of the soldier and keep on doing the righteous thing with Shield. He saw Shield as being just like, the good fight of World War II, but the planet has changed, the country has changed, the government has changed, and Shield is not the same military operation that he served back in 1944. And I love how this film explores the tragedy of his heroism.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because even in the beginning of the film with that first action sequence, even though they do it more in a comedic way, like that whole thing, like, being a man out of time.
Barbershop quartet and all that.
Yeah, like my whole barbershop quartet is dead. So, and then it's like when they're on that ship, him and Black Widow, when they're back and forth with her trying to set up a date for him and whatnot, and he's just not, it's like, the one with the lip ring. And so it's like they're doing it in a very comedic way, but it's still speaking to what you're saying about him being in this.
He's so alone.
Yeah, absolutely. So I thought that's pretty cool too.
What about you, Lisa? I know you're not as big a fan of Winter Soldier as Brad.
I still enjoy it.
Yes. What are your thoughts about as far as Captain America as a character, and then where he is in this film, and because obviously you've seen him appear in Age of Ultron, and so you would know where his character is going. But watching him in this film, what are your thoughts on Sam as far as being displaced and how it's handled as in the film?
I think that Captain America.
I'm sorry, Captain America, not Sam being displaced. Sorry, Steve
being displaced in time is an interesting concept to explore, and the ideas of, okay, what is a reflection of values? Can his values change? Can what he believed in still be true? I think that's very interesting. I also think in this film, we have a rift between Steve Rogers and S.H.I.E.L.D. that is just irreparable.
Yeah.
And he lives in this place of tremendous distrust. This idea that that he can be a soldier but still have to be true to who he is, and that he's not serving S.H.I.E.L.D. and he's not serving the United States or whatever, as much as he's serving what is right and what is just.
Right.
And if that is the unpopular dissenting opinion, that is what he can't do. He's incapable of doing something contrary to what he believes in. Yeah. And I think that we see that play out further as the MCU grows and changes and all of that wonderfulness.
It's interesting because I think with Winter Soldier, one of the themes I take away was the conversation he had with Nick Fury and those different, like you were saying, Brad, about the different ideas, ideologies that he has and what S.H.I.E.L.D. and Nick Fury has, where when he takes a look, when they go down and he looks at all these the helicarriers, that's
Project Insight.
Yeah, and he says a line, I'm paraphrasing, where it's just like, you point a gun at somebody's head and you call it freedom. And it's like, that's not freedom. And Nick Fury is like, well, look, we're trying to stop the threat before it happens. And
which is a concept that comes up again in
Age of Ultron with Tony Stark. And I think all that stuff is just leading through. And I like how all that stuff, they're dealing with these different ideologies and how Captain America definitely has this certain point of view with how he sees freedom and how he sees, our governments and stuff like that, and how, as far as like where he came from.
He wakes up and he discovers that his country has learned all the wrong lessons from his fight.
Exactly. So I like you said, I like that exploration, and I think that's very interesting to explore, especially past this film into Age of Ultron and more so into Civil War.
I also enjoyed watching the change of relationship between Steve Rogers and Black Widow.
Yeah.
We really haven't had a lot of one-on-one time with that particular character, and the fact that she does have this camaraderie, she's like this trained spy, but she does have this camaraderie with the men that she works with, and And there's a little bit of like kind of playful chemistry between those two characters. Yeah, and Chris Evans looks great in a hoodie.
Yeah.
I do gotta say before we move on to the next film is this movie has. I've told you about this, Brad. It's 2 great action sequences, but for me, that fight, that action sequence that starts when Winter Soldier is on the hoodie and he kills Sitwell by throwing him out, the whole thing on the overpass, to when he's revealed to Captain America, that whole set piece is my favorite action sequence in the entire MCU.
So good.
Entire every film, no matter what. It is.
Is that the one where Nick Fury's? It starts with him.
No.
I like that one too.
That's great too.
Yeah.
But this one on the overpass with
Winter Soldier has the best action.
Oh yeah. So when
that-
the minigun. Steve gets thrown into the bus.
Yeah.
Okay,
that whole sequence all the way up to the reveal that it's Bucky is my favorite action sequence in the entire MCU.
That fight, the hand-to-hand combat between him and Bucky is really awesome.
Yeah, because
That
just the
knife
way
fight.
that it's structured and the storytelling that's being told throughout, it's just the Russos. I mean, the Russos definitely showed what they can do. This is phenomenal.
I don't think we can move on without talking about Hydra being
Absolutely.
an infection
Yeah.
inside Shield, or an infestation probably is the better word. The Avengers is that film in 2012 is like that's the height of Shield. Look at this. Shield is this badass helicarrier, secret organization. Fury's got his fingers in everything, and then we learn here that it's false. It's paper mache. It's really nothing. And everything that Nick Fury was fighting for, everything he was willing to do for this organization, he was ultimately working for. The villain. How did you guys react to that reveal?
It was interesting for me because I wasn't really expecting that when we what's the computer? These names.
Zola, yeah, Armin
Zola. Yeah,
when
we learn like throughout the
mind blown when he came back.
Yeah, without the history that they've slowly been infiltrating Shield and planning all these, and then learning like Robert Redford and his character and his part that he plays, and you could definitely feel the betrayal that Nick Fury feels when he learns all this information. And trying to, I love that scene at the end where he tries to say, "Okay, we got to salvage what we can," and like Captain America's like, "No," it's like everything goes, like nothing, all of it has to end. And so
there's no going back. You can't put
no,
the genie back in the bottle.
You can't. So I don't know. I like it. Caught me off guard, but I thought it was an interesting direction because once you make that choice, it has to play out throughout the rest of your universe. So I thought that was an interesting decision to make.
Except if you're the Shield TV show.
Well, I don't watch this.
I was watching Shield around this time, and it does play into it. Not to say that show's any good, and I had to leave eventually, but I hear it's better. Maybe.
Oh, okay.
They're in space.
Maybe.
Yeah. All right. My biggest takeaway from rewatching Captain America: Winter Soldier is in light of Civil War, in light of Age of Ultron, and in light of my own fan theory about Avengers Infinity War, that old saying, you don't know what you got until it's gone. When I think of moral compass, like Captain America is the first character that comes up in my thought when talking about the superheroes of the MCU. But it starts, for me, it started and stopped right there. And I obviously never had the appreciation for Captain America or Steve Rogers as a character, when it specifically pertains to the MCU, as you do, Brad. But this most recent rewatch, again, taking in consideration Civil War, Age of Ultron, and my fan theories about Avengers Infinity War, it made me focus on, okay, if your fan theory is correct, Darren, and Steve isn't going to be here anymore after Infinity War, this is the hole that's going to be left in the MCU. This is the hole that's going to be left in the team. This guy and everything that he is in this movie, everything that he is in Civil War, and everything he is in Age of Ultron, all that stuff, that's going to be gone. How are you going to feel about that, Darren? And for once, I really started contemplating Steve's importance within the MCU and also in this team. And I got to say, I became a little distressed. It's making me, I haven't rewatched Civil War yet, but when I get to that point, I don't know. As I get closer to Infinity War, now, at first I was like throwing away fan theories when we talked about it before. Oh yeah, Steve's gone. He's gonna die. Now, like I'm not anticipating. Now I'm worried. I'm scared. Like it bothers me. I don't know like how I'm gonna feel at that point. And he's not even my favorite character. But what he is to the team, what he is in the MCU, and what he is as a person, and that's become crystallized, oddly enough, in this rewatch of Winter Soldier for me. I don't know why it happened, but that's where I am now with that character. So now, I'm not excited to see him go in Infinity War.
And it's how much the other people in the team respect him and look up to him.
Yeah.
And it's like he's not the most powerful. He's not Thor. He's not Vision. But everybody turns to him. Everybody looks to him for like that morality push for that. You know what I'm saying? So
They do until Civil War.
Right.
well, yeah. But that's still. But like you were saying about as far as going into Infinity War. But I think we as an audience feel that way about Steve Rogers too, because like I said, like he is my favorite. Him and T'Challa are my favorite characters.
Same.
In the MCU. Not reading the comics, but just looking at these films in this universe. Like he has grown to be my favorite character, and it's for all those reasons like that. And,
Yeah, and not to jump into Civil War, but that how Steve Rogers' actions in Civil War affect T'Challa, who was on the opposing side originally.
Yeah.
To see, his Rogers' influence on his actions in that film is really interesting as well.
Yeah. Especially someone as a strong personality as T'Challa. I mean, you have to be a special type of person to be influential to someone like that. And I think, and for someone like T'Challa to consider him and what he is.
Rogers is struggling from this point forward.
Yep.
In the MCU.
Oh, yeah.
And he and Tony Stark are having serious internal battles from this point all the way through.
In addition to the
Infinity
external
War.
conflict.
Right.
Yeah, like
So-
one guy is all no compromise, and Tony Stark is let's negotiate, let's compromise.
And when I look at either of those characters and their points of view, no compromise, I understand and I can respect that. I've lived by that mantra a lot. But then when Tony goes, all right, maybe we should compromise, because it's Tony who's willing to compromise. That's a big deal. Like, oh, you're willing to. You're not, the way you're thinking ain't the only way.
Tony's
you're not,
always changing. He's always evolving. He's always tinkering.
Yeah, and so I find that
he's not
interesting.
Jessica Jones.
Well, the thing, like to me, like with Tony Stark compromising, like he's willing to compromise his morals for an end, for a specific end, and Steve Rogers puts his values first. He and I think that both of those sides have merit.
Yeah, I think he does until a very specific moment in Civil War, and he has one major sin in Civil War, which we'll have to talk about.
To come about.
All right, what do we got
tease, I like
after
that.
Guardians.
Guardians of the Galaxy?
I think Lisa's got to take this
Lisa,
off.
of course, absolutely.
The Guardians of the Galaxy are my favorite little corner
What
of
a
the
bunch of
MCU.
a-holes.
I love my little a-holes. For me, like Guardians of the Galaxy was the first of the MCU that I felt like was reaching out to me specifically. It's heisty, it's funny, music is at the center of the message, and it's 70s music, which I really enjoy and appreciate. And I think that in this trend now that's set up in this particular chapter of the MCU, it's got James Gunn all over it. And once he directs this film, nobody else can really do a Guardians of the Galaxy film.
That's what it feels like.
And I love that. Yeah. The fact that he has these kind of cast off characters of that are just kind of ragtag together that nobody really knows so much about that he can't do whatever he wants with them.
So I'm kind of curious to see how you're going to respond to the Guardians under the reign of the Russo brothers in Infinity War.
I have my concerns. I also like and we've already seen it a little bit in the trailer of how's Star-Lord going to be with Tony Stark? How's Star-Lord going to be with, Ant-Man? How's Star-Lord going to be with Spider-Man? There are so many personality things where it's just like, I just don't see it working out.
Sarcasm overload.
Like who's going to outquip everybody else? It might be a little bit suffocating.
Well, the interesting thing about it that I just read as far as Infinity War is that the Russo brothers really took their time to collaborate with all the other directors.
Yeah.
I mean, with Taika, with James Gunn, with Ryan Coogler. They collaborated to make sure everything was kind of unified with the world and these characters. So I'm interested to see how all that's going to kind of meld together.
I think that be one of the biggest assets that, with all those directors working under the MCU, the Russo brothers having access to James Gunn to say, hey, would Star-Lord say this? Does Star-Lord, does this feel right? Would he do this? Would Groot do this? Is this what Gamora feels? If she says this, does this fall in line with? I think that's an important factor. So you have a cohesiveness, and those characters are able to flow from their respective films into this one directed by someone other than James Gunn or Ryan Coogler or something like that. So my hope is that, it works out, which, Marvel hasn't given me a reason to believe that it won't. But it's an interesting thought to see those personalities together.
It's nice, though, to have this little corner of this franchise where the Guardians of the Galaxy are not at all aware of the Avengers and what they're up to. Their heroism is not at all inspired by the Avengers on Earth, where Thor had that, but he's part of the original fam. Like all of these next characters coming up, we're going to be talking about Ant-Man.
Yeah.
He lives in a post-Avengers universe when he, has the opportunity to have powers. His first thought is, am I going to be like the Avengers in this way or that way? Yeah. And so, the fact that there is, we live on Earth. It's where we keep our shit, right? The fact that they can just kind of be in their own separate little, potted plant kind of germinating on their own, and then to see them replanted on Earth is going to be kind of fascinating.
Yeah.
But it's going to also make them less special somehow because they're kind of on their own and they're just doing.
I don't
their
think
own
it'll
thing.
make them less special. There's a talking tree, a talking raccoon, a green lady, Drax, a green gray dude, and Peter Quill. They're going to be special no matter where they go. I think,
I hope so.
especially on Earth, they're going to stand out so much. But their personalities, I think, are what make them special. And so if they stay true to what James Gunn created, again, no matter where they go, they're going to be the Guardians of the Galaxy, I think.
And, before we leave this film, I think the element that I respond to the strongest is Peter's mother. And the influence of Peter's mother on Peter, but as well as the rest of the galaxy, thanks to her fandom of classic rock and this soundtrack. And there really aren't a lot of movies out there that use the soundtrack as a character like you see in this Guardians of the Galaxy and also Volume 2.
Yeah, I mean that was my biggest takeaway. It's funny, lately, a lot of people I've been hearing as far as Ready Player One, they talk about Spielberg. Is he's bringing the heart and the magic back to some of that old Spielberg films, and not to compare James Gunn to Spielberg, but this film has that for me. It has that heart. It has that magic. When I watch this film, I just have so much fun. I connect with these characters, and I feel the emotions watching this, and just the way he shoots space and the colors and the
colors.
The colors is just amazing. And that third act battle is just so much fun to watch. Seeing them all work together, and And then that last moment when when Groot dies, and Groot does die, it's by saving the group. And every time he says "We are Groot," it's just like my bottom lip starts to quiver. It's like,
Yeah, and then after that sequence, the final showdown comes to this ridiculous dance off as a distraction for Drax to fire that.
yeah,
Not Hydron Collider, but whatever his super cannon is. And then that Infinity Gem, the Power Stone, busts out of Ronan the Accuser's mallet. They grab onto it and take my hand, Peter.
Yeah,
you
and he
see
sees
the
his
mom.
mother.
Oh.
It's
Heartbreaking.
so good, man. It's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. That's my favorite MCU film as of right now. Guardians of the
It's
Galaxy.
a great one.
Zach just told me Peter Quill is his favorite character in the MCU.
Oh, wow. The whole MCU?
Yeah,
Yay!
that's it.
T'Challa.
Make sure I don't know. Maybe I didn't hear that right, but no, I know what it was. We were talking about the most recent trailer, and we were talking about who the hell are you guys, and Peter Quill standing there, and he said that went into a discussion about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. When we talked about that, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is the movie that Zachary said he loves that movie. First of all, the father-son stuff, but he said that was the movie that made him really pay attention to Peter Quill, and Peter Quill became one of his favorites because of Volume 2. After Guardians, what do we got next?
Age of Ultron.
Uh-oh. Is this going to be a divisive one with
Hell,
the fans?
You know what?
Are we going to get some mean tweets?
Oh no!
What's interesting is the common idea after the release of Age of Ultron was that it was a disappointment, and we've always been pro Avengers 2. And since I've been writing these articles for the Film School Rejects on the MCU Rewatch, after I did this film, I got a lot of response from a lot of people telling me I was, an idiot, and this is one of the worst movies in the entire franchise. But I also got several diehard fans talking to me, and it feels good. Not only are we all in agreement here in the Dork Cave that Age of Ultron is not only a good movie, but one of the best MCU films. The Indie Dork is with us in that.
Yeah.
Aaron Prescott of the Rest in Pictures podcast is with us in that. There's a lot of fans, fans out there. So, feel good. Now, if you're one of those, haters, you can just turn us off, or you can listen real hard right now, because we're going to convince you that Age of Ultron's a great Marvel movie.
Yeah.
Who starts?
Brian, are we taking turns? I'll start.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, that is one of those pop culture things, those enigmas to me, like how I genuinely don't understand how people think that this is a shitty movie. Now, that's not to say that I discount your opinion. Your opinion, that is not wrong. If you feel like this movie is a shitty movie, it's the worst MCU movie to you, you're not wrong in that. It is the shittiest MCU movie to you. To me, to us dorks here, to the people that Brad just mentioned, it's a great film. I genuinely don't understand why people don't like this film. Joss Whedon returns, and in this film, like what the MCU has been doing, people, one of the complaints is like it just feels like it's a movie just a setup for whatever. You have all this other stuff, feels aimless. You got that large chunk of time in the middle wasted on the farmhouse. No. All of those things, even when this movie comes out, of course you don't know how the events of this film are going to shape the characters in this film in Civil War or in the Infinity War. We don't understand yet. But just like every other film, what it's doing is just laying groundwork for the characters. Yes, it might be leading to something, but even if it's a standalone movie, the actions of a character in the first act are leading to something in the second act, are leading to something in the final act. They're always going to lead to something. It's fine to me. But I think what Joss Whedon was able to do, and there's that story of how stressful it was working on this film behind the scenes with the studio and things like that. But I think with even under all of that stress, what he was able to do with those characters, he's juggling a large cast. He's tying up not even tying up. He's addressing things with each character, staying true to stuff that was given to us in their solo films,
and introducing new
characters. So there's a lot of stuff going on, and for me, as a large ensemble cast with all these spinning plates in the air, I feel like he was still able to, stick the landing with as far as being entertaining, as far as taking these characters somewhere different than where they were at the beginning of the film, introducing new characters, but also, in a very shorthand way, establishing what most films, when they try to establish a character, they either fail to do when they do it, like use a whole half hour, or a whole second act, or whatever. Like just the idea of the hammer lifting and
worthy,
and that scene with and the Vision lifting that. Like he didn't
That
say
payoff,
anything.
yeah.
Just that payoff is huge as far as not just a cool moment, but what that says about not only Vision but everybody else in that room and how they relate to him, how Vision sees himself, how Cap sees Vision, how Thor sees him. And so I don't know. There's a lot of stuff going on in that movie that I feel like people don't give it enough credit for.
They don't. I mean, for me, I know I like this movie more than the original Avengers.
Same.
Me, personally, for me, the original Avengers just doesn't age well. I still like the film, but for this film, because I think the movie dives a lot deeper into the characterizations of all these different characters, just like how we talked about stemming from Iron Man 3 and why Ultron was created. Also, going more so into the differences of ideas between Stark and Captain America from Winter Soldier. Like you were saying, you're continuing these threads from other films and introducing new threads, and then also even within that, you're introducing new characters, which were some of my favorites, which was Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch. And to see their arc throughout this film, I mean, there's so much that's going on. And for me, it's all about the emotionality of the film. And to be connected to characters emotionally, I'll always just kind of not necessarily give a movie a pass, but that's what will resonate with me with these films. And Scarlet Witch was just one of my favorite parts of this film. And there's so much that's going on. And then the stuff on the farm, I thought was really integral to just the dynamics of the team. The relationship between Hulk and Black Widow, I thought was very interesting, and I loved where all that stuff went, especially when when Scarlet Witch gets into their heads, and then we see them kind of go back into the past, and we learn a little bit more about Black Widow and her past, and Thor, and everything going on with that, and then some of the action, all the stuff that's happening in South Africa with the Hulkbuster and Hulk fight, the stuff in Seoul, and all that stuff.
The villain, Ultron,
yeah, that relationship between Ultron and Tony Stark, and how and how Ultron never wants to kind of be not related, but be
he wants out of the shadow of Tony Stark, the way Tony Stark wants out of the shadow of Howard Stark.
Exactly.
That's what Age of Ultron to me is. You're watching Tony deteriorate over the course of this film. He's he picks up after Iron Man 3. And he wants to be the savior. He wants to help the world. He needs to help the world. He gets that vision from the Scarlet Witch at the beginning when he grabs that scepter,
which is a great
Loki's
opening.
glow stick of destiny, and he sees the end of planet Earth.
Yeah.
And in his vision, his ego is Captain America saying, "Tony, you could have fixed this.
Yeah.
Why didn't you save us? This is your fault." And
that stays with him.
And that is what causes him to create this AI to tinker around in the mind gem and create this destructive force. And it runs away from him, right? It destroys him, and that creature Ultron is born from his ego and carries the same terrible thoughts that Tony Stark carries around in his head.
Yeah.
And that being has a god complex, right? The geography of belief, sitting in the center of Sokovia in the church, wanting to bring back the meteorite that killed the dinosaurs and restart the population again, civilization again. And then Tony Stark's response to that is, okay, I can do it better. We're mad scientists, Bruce. Let's just do it again.
Yeah.
And that's crazy. And Cap and Scarlet Witch know that's crazy. okay, sure, it works out all right because Thor has his hot tub Thor machine vision and knows that this creation, this second creation, is going to be a gift to them. And Tony only lucks out in the vision being a benevolent being. That's the beginning of Civil War right there. We see a little mini fight between Cap and Hawkeye
right before Vision is created. Yeah.
And thankfully, Vision's worthy.
Yeah.
But there's a scenario where Vision wasn't worthy.
Yeah. Lisa, you too many action scenes will make you sleepy beepy. But a movie where you have interesting characters conversing back and forth, if there's some dialogue that piques your interest and can hold you, and we have that done and directed and written by Joss Whedon. What are your thoughts on Avengers Age of Ultron, especially today, outside of your initial viewing, but with where the MCU has gone since then? Civil War we obviously have as an extension of the events of this film. So looking back on Age of Ultron, how does that sit with you today?
What I think that I love Age of Ultron. Let's just put that on the table.
Yeah.
What I think it does exceptionally well, and you guys have all touched on, is the MCU is great at pulling at loose ends and seeing the logical extension of things.
Yeah.
So we've seen Ultron is the logical extension of Tony Stark's inventiveness, ego, and paranoia. Right, and his need to fix and to protect himself and the world by extension. We see Black Widow, her relationship with Bruce Banner being the logical extension of her feeling unseen and as not a nurturing person, and she has this ability to influence Bruce Banner, the Hulk, in a way that is calming and in a way that is feminine in a warm way. She's definitely been seen as feminine in the look at me, how I enter this boxing ring in a sexy down way with my cleavage and stuff. She's been seen in that way, but the Hulk sees her as this calming maternal influence. And then we have the reveal of her not being able to bear children and how that makes her feel like a monster. Yeah. We see the twins being the logical extension of, we have these Avengers now, so let's create the anti-Avengers. Let's make other superheroes that will be able to stand up against these good guys. For every good guy, we need bad guys. So as much as the Avengers are heroes, and every time they save the world, it ups the ante for something horrible to happen.
It's the escalation thing, right?
Mm-hmm. And Tony sees that. Captain America sees that. And to me, that as much as the Vision is this thing of hope and this idea of, something worthy can come of all of this strife, there is this sense of impending doom through Age of Ultron, and what we've seen what S.H.I.E.L.D. is capable of. S.H.I.E.L.D. is capable of, being with Hydra and
putting guns in the sky.
Exactly. So there's always more at stake.
Yeah.
And as the Avengers has the potentiality of being a tremendously dark and horrible place, as funny as it gets to be. Clint Barton, the logical extension of, I am so vulnerable. I just shoot arrows. So I have to protect my family first, and I can't open up to these other guys on the team. Well, the other guys on the team, they see that and go, Clint's keeping secrets, you know what I mean? And they become very paranoid and so there's just so much going on. And so now the next film is Ant-Man, right? Which is high contrast, but how are we going to fold? We're going to fold another person into this. It's fascinating.
Before we get to Ant-Man, I want to talk about that farmhouse.
Yeah.
And I mean, to me, that is such a crucial and wonderful moment in this entire film
I love
because it's essential experience for for various characters. One, it's it's a revelation for Hawkeye. He has a family,
And it's coming from after they all been broken.
right?
Yeah.
This is the safe house.
Yeah.
But Black Widow comes home, and she's cool Auntie Nat. She because her and Clint are buddy
Yeah.
BFFs. She's aware of this life. She's a welcome addition to that home. But she's never going to have the kids that Hawkeye has. So all she can have is this relationship, this possible relationship with Bruce Banner, who doesn't believe any of this domestic life is possible for him being a monster.
Yeah.
You have Steve Rogers, who has been searching for a home since he woke up, and Peggy's not. It's not going to be. He lost that chance. He never showed up to that dance, right? He sees Hawkeye's family, and it's tremendous pain. And Tony Stark sees Hawkeye's family, and it's tremendous pain.
Yeah.
He's barely holding onto this relationship with Pepper Potts. The idea that he could have kids out in the woods somewhere is just such a ridiculous fantasy that he cannot possibly realize it. And it becomes, another staging point for Cap and Tony, chopping wood, right? And their two ideologies of, I want to put this blanket on the world. I want to protect the world. I want to retire so we can all kick back and have Mai Tais. And Cap's like, there's no retirement from this.
Yeah.
You can't join this life and walk away. Yeah. And anytime anybody tries to put a gun up in the sky and prevent the war before it happens, bad things happen.
Yep.
And so I think like to say that farm sequence is boring or halts in the story.
People aren't paying attention.
It's just like that's the entire film in that moment.
Absolutely. And before we move on, I just want to go back and talk a little bit more about the twin Scarlet Witch. It just amazes me in a film like this with so many different characters, and you introduce new characters, Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch, and her arc in this film. I mean, she almost feels like the emotional core of the film for me to some degree. When you kind of look at. First, you learn about their past as far as like why they want to get this revenge against Tony Stark for what happened to their family, and that's why they're the only ones who were able to survive Baron von Strucker's experiments. And then once they learn about what Ultron is doing, and then they say, okay, we didn't know you were trying to destroy the world. We just thought you wanted to
bust up Tony Stark.
Yeah, what's up Tony Stark? And then you start to see their arc, and then what happens when Quicksilver dies, and that moment in the train when he says, he's like, you can't stay, you're going to die. She's like, I've already died. He's like, you want to know what it feels like? It's like your heart being ripped out, and she rips Ultron's heart out, and just that devastation she feels when Quicksilver dies. It's just amazing how much of an arc she has throughout this entire film.
There's not one character that is who they are at the beginning of the movie. And I think that it's hard to find a movie with one character where the character
has an arc
at all, especially in these, fluff genres, big budget.
How dare you,
fluff
Lisa.
genres. So to me, I think, I know that Joss Whedon is # problematic right now, but that is his tremendous gift as a storyteller, is that he can go, every time something happens, he considers, and how would this make them feel? And how would these feelings make this person act? Everybody is when it comes down to it, everybody is just walking around with hurt fifis and trying to get some love and attention and fill some holes.
Yeah.
Sexually and literally.
Oh, yeah. Like that scene with her and Hawkeye in the bunk before they go out, and what he says to her, that little pep talk. He's like, look, if you want to stay here, I'll send your brother, but if you step out this door, you're an Avenger. He's like, look, we're in a floating city, and
city is flying.
And I have
love the way he says that.
and I have a bow and arrow. And I love Hawkeye, man. It's just awesome. And Quicksilver, that one line that he has when the helicarrier shows up, and he's like, this is what S.H.I.E.L.D. is, and Cap says, this is what they used to be. And he's
Or
like,
should be.
This is what they should be. He's like, this isn't so bad. And it's just like, these little moments that all these characters have, it just feels good to see that.
Yeah, and go to your point, Brian, that Hulkbuster sequence, comic book wise, that's like the greatest.
Yeah, it's
It
awesome.
is so beautiful.
Yes.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Yes. Darren was a happy camper
Yeah.
in that sequence.
Yeah.
All right, and the final film of Phase 2, if I'm not mistaken, is a little small guy named Ant-Man.
Yay.
Yay!
I really enjoyed rewatching this movie with Brad. I especially after the heft of Age of Ultron, to just have kind of like a fun kind of little heist movie is such a palate cleanser.
Well, not too much unlike Iron Man 3 coming off of Avengers, in that not necessarily as a fun more fun than Ant-Man, but I'm saying is how they draw the scope in a little bit to focus on this one guy and his daddy and his daughter and his relationship with his daughter. And that was something I appreciated as a palate cleanser after, like you just mentioned, Lisa, like the heaviness of, what happens with Sokovia and the characters in Age of Ultron. So that was something I appreciated.
The setting of it, it's on the other side of the country,
Yeah.
San Francisco. It's not New York. It's just, it feels like like you say, just like with Guardians, it's like its own little corner.
But the important thing is that the Avengers do exist.
They do.
Yes.
Yeah,
And I think that a lot, like, if Ant-Man was the first Marvel movie, he'd be a very different character.
Right, if Edgar Wright got to make his version of the film, it would be a very, very different film. Fathers and daughters, right?
Yeah.
That's really what Ant-Man's about.
Yeah.
And this idea that Hank Pym, he ruined his relationship with Hope because he feels responsible for the death of his wife, who, as the Wasp, as his sidekick, or as his partner, went into the quantum realm and disappeared. And from that point forward, he realized, this Pym particle is not fun and games. I need to protect the world from it, but I really need to protect my daughter from it. And in being so overtly protective, he ruins his relationship with her. And when he sees Darren Cross on the verge of cracking his formula and using it for nefarious means, he can no longer don the suit, but he has to find somebody worthy of it. And because Scott Lang, he's a criminal. Yes, he's just been released from prison, but the crime he committed, as Baskin Robbins Dale says, was a cool crime, not a violent crime.
Yeah.
And it was a crime that stemmed out of his own morality. And he also sees how that act ruined his relationship with his ex-wife and will potentially ruin his relationship with his young daughter.
Yeah.
And he chooses Scott to be the next Ant-Man because he sees so much of himself.
Yeah.
And at the end of this movie, ultimately, there's that line of dialogue where Hank says, look, we're not saving our world. We're saving their world.
Yeah.
That's who we're fighting for. And in Ant-Man, it's Kevin Feige, it's the MCU telling you this is why our heroes kick ass, because you can relate to them. They're fallible, but they're just trying to do the best that they can.
Yeah, and that's one thing I took away from this was definitely that father-daughter relationship between Scott Lang and his daughter. And it was one interesting line that Judy Greer says at the birthday party when they're on the porch. She's like she already sees you as a hero. So just be the hero that she already thinks that you are.
Gut punch.
And it's like, oh man, it's like in this like fun little comedic heist film, like to hear something like that really just kind of lets you know like this is what the film is about.
That was my big takeaway on this rewatch. Is it's yes, it's light and fluffy and fun, but there was a lot more heart and pain in this film than I remembered.
Yeah. So good.
What about your rewatch of Ant-Man, Lisa, or your initial watch?
My initial watch and my rewatch. You guys know I love a heist film.
Yep.
And you can't have a heist film without building a team.
Yep.
And that team includes Michael Pena.
Yep.
And he steals this
He's
movie.
great. He's awesome.
He is so freaking funny. And like his ability to have the blankest expression on his face, where you can actively see he's not listening, cracks me up every single time.
I'd be surprised when he
funny.
pops up on screen in the sequel if people don't just start clapping when he first pops
That
up.
line when he first sees the he's like, "Daddy, don't get scared."
and
That whole thing at the end where he's like, well, part of my character is he's gonna whistle. He's like, don't whistle.
So
He's
good.
whistling
So
a
good.
small world after all.
so
so
good.
funny. And then David Dastmalchian.
Yeah, that guy.
He plays the kind of Eastern European dude. I think he's funny. He's much more subtle next to the Michael Pena character. But I think still has some really funny straight man lines. And then there's, of course, T.I.
Yeah.
So fun. I think that that's a fun little team, and I would love to see them kind of integrated into the rest of the MCU, especially because Scott Lang comes from this criminal background, and with the criminal background comes a ton of loyalty, and trust, and we've all watched Heat.
Yeah.
There are the guys on your team, and you can't do a job without this guy.
That's right.
So
That's right. All right. My appreciation for the film, in light of, again, this is one of those situations where, having seen Scott in Civil War and wondering, speculating where he's going to be in Infinity War and in the events of that film or afterwards, it's going back to rewatch this film. It's cool to see. I don't know. It's just cool to see the origins of this character and the heart that he brings.
Yeah.
Obviously, I have a very strong relationship with my daughter, so a lot of that stuff was stuff that I immediately related to. That quote you talked about, where you just have to be the hero that she already thinks you are. Like that's I lived my life by that ever since December 17th, 2009. Like that's what I do for Sia. So like all that stuck with me, but it was just really cool seeing Ant-Man and just picturing, how he's going and being excited and anticipating his integration into the MCU, not just in his standalone film. Because watching Ant-Man, and this is why I had the thought this time I was thinking, how does this character fit with a Doctor Strange, or how does this character fit with a Thor, or how does this character even fit with just Steve? And we get to see that. We get to see that later on in Civil War, like how, what this guy would be like if he met Steve Rogers. And so it was cool anticipating, his character in the MCU later on when I was watching this film. My only issues with the film would be that, Darren Cross does not make a strong impression on me.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day,
Better than Malekith.
yeah.
Yeah, I do agree with that.
he had a cooler suit than Malekith. I would say that at the end of the day, kind of like what Lisa mentioned earlier, where when she's thinking about the film and rewatching, I'm not really concerned about Darren Cross anymore. Like I'm focusing on Scott and who he is as a person, because this guy that's in this small scope film about a dad trying to do right by his daughter, he's about to go through some crazy shit in another movie, in two more movies. You know what I mean? Like he's going to go through some crazy stuff. Yeah. So in order for me to be invested in that character and his plight later on, it's important that I buy into him in this film. and it's important that I care about him on a human level, so that there is a very real human being in this crazy circumstance. And so for me, that would heighten the drama, and I do care about Scott because he's got to get back home to his daughter.
And I would also say this film really does have a lot of fun with the power of miniaturization and communication with ants. And you know what? Watching it this time, I was like, no, Anthony.
I know. I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
It's funny. It's like, this line always kills me because someone pointed this out on Facebook, where it's just like a line that is not meant to be funny, but it just comes off that way. It's like at the end of the movie with Darren Cross is in, he's like trying to kidnap his daughter. He's in the room, and she's like, I want my daddy. And then Darren Cross, I want your daddy too. I don't know why they just.
Yeah,
that's just.
But I love that battle with the Thomas the Train set.
It's awesome.
It's so joyous.
Yeah.
And then that one ant gets embiggened.
Yeah.
Yep. And then this is running around. Like, what happened to that ant?
And just to leave the film on that moment around the dinner table. Now that he's reestablished some kind of communication with his ex-wife and her new husband.
Yeah.
And he has that moment where he's just like, gosh, what do you do after you live through that? And what do you talk about? And then the daughter's like, I just did my first cartwheel.
Yeah.
And then
bring
so
it
beautiful.
back down.
It's a beautiful
really,
moment.
really beautiful.
Yeah, it's awesome.
What are your thoughts about ending this phase on this film?
I thought it was interesting to do that because I literally thought it was going to be Age of Ultron, but then they said Kevin Feige said no, Phase 2 ends with Ant-Man. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. But it also makes sense when you see Phase 3 start with Civil War.
I mean, to go from Age of Ultron directly into Civil War, those are two really heavy movies.
Yeah.
And in rewatching them, week after week, Ant-Man does feel like a tremendous tonal shift after Age of Ultron. And really after Age of Ultron and Winter Soldier and then Guardians of the Galaxy. Guardians of the Galaxy is a ton of fun, but as we were saying, there's a lot of emotion in that film too. Phase 2 is really heavy. And Ant-Man is not necessarily fluff, as Lisa might say it, but it is certainly...
Fluff is not negative.
I see it as negative. It is a necessary change of pace.
Yeah.
And a good reminder of what it was like when we all first saw Iron Man in 2008.
True. True.
So that's it, ladies and gentlemen. That's Phase 2 of the MCU. Stay tuned, obviously, for Phase 3.
Civil War.
Which it's for me, Phase 3 might be my favorite. That I have the most movies that
what do we have so far?
Well,
so
in
it's
Phase 3?
Civil War, Doctor Strange,
Guardians of the
Guardians
Galaxy,
2,
Spider-Man,
Thor,
Black Panther.
So it's 6 movies. Yeah.
And then Avengers.
I
think Kevin Feige said that Phase 3 ends at Avengers 4.
Yeah, so Phase 3 has the most movies because then we still got Ant-Man, the Wasp, Captain Marvel, then Avengers 4.
That's Phase 3?
Yeah, that's still Phase 3.
That's Phase 3.
Yeah.
Oh, that's going to be a long review.
I know.
All right.
No, we're going to do a review cast just before Infinity War.
Yeah,
so we'll talk Civil War through Black Panther.
Yeah, so we'll do a Phase 3 so far.
Yeah.
Part 1, Part 2.
Yeah.
I could never get tired about talking about these movies. I
They're
could talk
awesome.
about them forever.
Absolutely.
Listen to you guys talk about them forever.
And with the success that the MCU has been having, Kevin Feige, Marvel Studios, and everyone involved, it looks like we're probably going to be talking about it forever. So
Yay!
we're good to go. We're good to go, which is exciting. Hit us up on social media at ItModcast on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Let us know what you are doing as far as a rewatch. If you're rewatching them, let us know your thoughts on the individual films in the MCU's Phase 2 or Phase 2 as a whole. Brian can be found at The Turtle Dork on Twitter, at The Turtle Dork 1 on Instagram, and at Brian William Young on Facebook. Lisa Gullickson is at Sidewalk Siren on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. And Brad Gullickson is at Mouth Dork on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Letterboxd, and Untapped. And I'm Darren Smith, the Disco Dork, on all social medias. That's going to do it for us. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Go see Ready Player One and also A Quiet Place. Our review cast is going to be on A Quiet Place, if I'm not mistaken.
No.
No?
I thought it was on Ready Player One.
Oh.
No, Ready Player One.
And our Fistful is
Okay.
going to be
Fistful will be in
Quiet
honor
Place
of
related.
A Quiet
Yeah, so
Place.
next week
Yes.
it'll be a fistful of shut up.
Yes.
And come to AwesomeCon
Yes.
tomorrow,
yeah.
Saturday, and check out my panel that's at 5:00, telling the story.
Come prepped with your cues, and he'll A all up in your face.
Oh.
I will A in your face. But I'll be doing that with Liz Reed of Cuddles and Rage and Emily Sears of Birth
Yay.
Movies Death.
You guys had that same panel last year, right?
It's going to be a little different. We're going to talk about a few different
Different
New
things.
things.
New things.
But I mean, but no, not the same, but the same people, right?
Yeah,
Because
same-
Emily and
yeah.
Liz were on the panel with you, right? Yeah,
Yep,
okay.
yep.
Are you going to come out this time and support?
I got a gig.
Oh, okay. Sunday.
And guess what? Lisa's not going to be there either.
I also have a gig.
Darren's going to support and record, and we're going to record the panel like we
okay.
did last year.
All right. Yes. So that's going to do it for us. Thank you all for listening. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. And until next time.